It's time to begin our study tonight, and we're beginning a new study tonight. We're starting in the little letter to Timothy, Paul's second letter to Timothy. 2 Timothy. We appreciate Dave's sharing with us his thoughts on 1 Timothy, and I appreciate the offer he extended to me to continue the quarter, finish the quarter, by looking at Paul's last letter, the letter to 2 Timothy. We're going to spend tonight basically doing a lot of background work on this little letter. I think it's difficult to appreciate the letter without really understanding the situation that Paul is in when he writes the letter. We need to know also about some personality traits of Timothy, because that has a lot to do with what Paul's going to say to him. We also, it's important, I think, that we understand the political climate that's in place when Paul writes this letter, because that also impacts what Paul has to say. So we're going to try to get familiar with the writer and the recipient and some circumstances under which the letter is written. And as I always try to do, what's this letter saying to me? You know, this was written long ago, and it's a very personal letter between two people. What's in it to me 2,000 years later? And as always, welcome your comments. I think we'll have a traveling mic going around, and anytime you want to chime in and offer your thoughts, you're more than welcome to do so. Let's begin by introducing you to this gentleman. His name is Sullivan Ballou. Sullivan Ballou was born in 1829 in Rhode Island. He was orphaned when he was quite young, but a wealthy benefactor stepped in and gave him resources to get an education, and he used those opportunities, and he became a very successful attorney. He served in the Rhode Island State Legislature. He and his wife, Sarah, have two little boys. Our country is unraveling in the 1850s, and it came completely apart in 1861, the outbreak of the Civil War. Sullivan Ballou enlisted in the Union Army. He was a firm believer in Lincoln's policy of saving the Union, and so he was among the first to volunteer for duty. His unit is assigned to Washington, D.C., and their job is to protect the Capitol. They are assuming that the Confederates are going to try to raid the Capitol, and they're there to protect it from that attack. While he's there, he wrote a letter to his wife back in Rhode Island, and her name is Sarah. Share with you some excerpts of that letter. It's dated July the 14th, 1861. My dear Sarah, indications are strong that we shall move in a few days. Lest I should not be able to write to you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eyes when I shall be no more. If it's necessary that I should fall on the battlefield, I'm ready. I have no misgivings about the cause in which I'm engaged. I'm perfectly willing to lay down all the joys in this life to help maintain this government. But I know that my own joys, I lay down nearly all of yours and replace them in this life with cares and sorrows. I cannot describe to you my feelings on this calm summer night when 2,000 men are sleeping around me, many of them enjoying their last sleep, perhaps, before that of death. I'm suspicious that death is creeping behind me as well with his fatal dart. Sarah, my love for you is deathless, yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind. The memories of all the blissful moments I've spent with you come crowding over me. How hard it is to give them up when we might have still lived and loved together and watched our boys grow to honorable manhood. I have but few claims on divine providence, But something whispers to me that I shall return unharmed. But if I do not, dear Sarah, never forget how much I love you. And when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, I will whisper your name. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back and flit unseen around those that they love, I will always be with you. If a soft breeze fans your cheek, it will be my breath. Or a breeze cools your throbbing temples, it will be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me, for we shall meet again. What a sad letter. 1 week later, their unit did move out as he thought they would, and their orders were to go to Richmond, Virginia, the Confederate capital. They were going to try to prevent the Confederate Congress from convening. And ironically, as they marched out of Washington, they were followed behind by a contingency of congressmen and their ladies riding in carriages. They're going to watch their heroes put this rebel insurrection down before it ever starts. They met a contingency of rebel forces near the town of Manassas on the banks of Bull Run Creek. And as the two armies gathered together, the spectators start spreading picnic lunches out on the hillsides. They're going to watch this battle. They have no idea what they're in for. They think they're watching a ball game. But when the bullets start flying and the blood starts flowing, chaos is going to ensue. There's a lot of similarities between this letter and Paul's letter to Timothy. Both very poignant letters. They're very sad. Sad tones. One writer that I read after said he couldn't read 2 Timothy without tearing up because it was so sad. And considering the circumstances under which Paul is writing this letter. Both writers are facing death. Paul said there's a tone of finality with both of these letters. Paul says the time of my departure is at hand. My days are just about up. And Sullivan Ballou is about to go into harm's way. And there's always the danger of death in that situation. Paul is literally on death row in a Roman prison when he writes this letter. Both letters were written to people that the writer dearly loved. Sarah, my love for you is deathless, he said. Never forget how much I love you. Paul says in his opening lines, Timothy, my son in the gospel, I constantly remember you in my prayers night and day, and I long to see you that I might be filled with joy. So both of these writers have a deep affection for the person that they're writing to. Both of these men have a cause that they're very devoted to. In fact, they're willing to die for it. Sullivan Ballou is willing to give his life for the preservation of the Union. Paul is willing to give his life for the gospel. But there's a stark difference between these two men who write these letters. One is young. Sullivan Ballou's 32 years old when he wrote this letter. He's vibrant. He's got a very bright future ahead of him with his career and his family. Paul, on the other hand, is old, he's cold, he's tired, he's lonely, and he's in prison. And his days are numbered, literally. Ballou never mailed that letter. The day after the battle, the governor of Rhode Island came to the battlefield to claim the bodies of the soldiers from his state who had fallen in battle. And among those bodies was Sullivan Ballou. And the letter was found in his personal belongings. And it was hand-delivered to Sarah. And she spent the next 56 years of her life as a widow. She was only 24 years old when her husband died. I hope Timothy made it to Rome, as Paul implored him to do in writing this letter. Any thoughts or comments? So Paul is in prison when he writes this. Not the first time he's written from prison. Written several letters from prison. The prison epistles, Ephesians. Clint shared with us some great thoughts Sunday night from this great letter. Philippians was written from prison. Colossians. And Philemon, a personal letter Paul wrote to a friend. I think it's notable that Paul, even though his normal procedure is disrupted, he'd rather be out in the field, face to face, preaching and teaching and meeting people. But now that's not possible. He's locked up. And so what he does, he's going to take advantage of that situation. He's going to bloom where he's planted. I can't be out there, but I can teach virtually, to use a common phrase. I'm going to do it through these letters. And some of his most powerful writings are done while his life is disrupted in prison. No moaning, poor pitiful me. God, why you gave me this job and now you won't let me do it. People are locking me up and interrupting what I'm supposed to do. But there are opportunities here, and I'll teach with my pen. And he writes these letters. But he also has opportunity, and he recognizes this too, that there are people I'm going to cross paths with that I never would have crossed paths with otherwise. He mentions that in the Philippian letter. He said the whole palace guard is aware that I'm here and why I'm here. And he implies that he'd had an opportunity to teach those people and maybe convert some of them, an opportunity he would never have had he not been locked up. So even though his normal procedure is not normal, he's now got opportunities, different opportunities, and he takes full advantage of that. Some of his richest writings come while he's imprisoned. A lot of his earlier mentions when he's in prison, he indicates that he expects to be released. In fact, that letter to Philemon, he says, get your guest room ready, because as soon as I get out of here, I'm coming to see you. Not this time. He doesn't have any expectations of being released. He is on death row. Some of those previous imprisonments had been house arrest. That he'd been confined, but had a little bit of flexibility, could have guests, could have visitors, but not this time. Where he's confined now, tradition says, is in a facility called Maritime Prison in Rome. And the facility where he is a two-chambered facility, one on top of the other. Tradition says Paul was confined in the lower level, and the only access to that was through a hole in the ceiling. You had to be let down into it. And it's cold, and it's dark, and it's dirty. And he's all alone down there by himself, awaiting his execution to be carried out. And his future is not real bright, because his life is in the hands of one of the most brutal barbaric ruler the world has ever known, Nero. Now, Nero's not mentioned by name in the scriptures, but his actions are. Nero's mother is Agrippina. She was the great-granddaughter of the very first emperor of Rome, Caesar Augustus. Agrippina, when her husband died, or after her husband died, she married the current Roman emperor. His name is Claudius. And Claudius is mentioned by name in the scriptures a couple of times. When she married Claudius, she worked out a little kind of prenuptial agreement. First of all, she got Claudius to agree that next in line, in the line of succession to be the next emperor, would be Nero. Even though Claudius has a biological son, she persuaded him to name Nero as his successor. And to kind of further seal that deal, she persuaded him to give Nero his daughter in marriage. Her name was Octavia. And he agreed to do that. So Nero married daughter of the Roman emperor, but Nero was only 13 years old at the time. By the way, Claudius is Agrippina's uncle. So there's a little bit of strange stuff going on here. 4 years after she married Claudius, he died. He just died. And there's pretty good evidence that she had him poisoned. And so, according to their agreement, the next Roman emperor is Nero. He is 17 years old. What a deal. We have a 17-year-old granddaughter. She's a beautiful, wonderful child, honor student, smart girl. But she is in no condition to run the Roman Empire at age 17. She might run the student council at her high school, but she's not going to run the Roman Empire. But that's Nero. Now, Agrippina's thought was she would be the real emperor. She'd be the power behind the throne, and Nero would just be a puppet. Well, that didn't work out that way. He objected to his mother interfering with his political life as well as his private life, so he had her executed. Man killed his own mother. He also killed Octavia when he found other love interest. So here's a brutal man. And he killed several other people who spoke out against him. So Paul, your life is in the hands of this man. Your future doesn't look real bright. Nero, after he envisions himself as a poet, as a musician, and he would have command performances. That is, he would command you to come and listen to his performances. And he didn't have a whole lot of talent. But he wanted to upgrade his palace. But the area where he wanted to build it was already, there were buildings already there. And so just coincidentally, a fire broke out in that area. There's no real clear evidence that he set the fire, no smoking gun, as it were, but there's no doubt he had a hand in it. Fire burned for 10 days, destroyed about 75% of the city. And so Nero said it's pretty obvious because of this fire, the Christians said it. And so as a result of that, he initiated a serious persecution against the Christian community. Did some horrible, brutal things to these Christians. Set them on fire, put them up on poles so they would light his gardens. Sewed them up in animal skins and threw them out onto the floor of the arena to be devoured by wild beasts and wild dogs. This is a mean man. And so that's when Paul was arrested as part of this process. Now later, Nero is going to commit suicide some years after all this stuff with the Christians has taken place. Died at the age of 31. But that's the political situation. And the Christians are being subjected to a great deal of horrible persecutions under the reign of Nero. Any thoughts, comments, or questions? Y'all just going to leave me hanging up here? Think of all that Paul had been through. He's been in this mission, this ministry for about 30 years. And the ordeals that he has experienced during those 30 years. It's estimated that during his missionary journeys, he traveled approximately 20,000 miles. There are no planes, no trains, no automobiles. A lot of that's on foot. A lot of that is on ships that are not very dependable. 20,000 miles over all of that whole area over there. He said 39 times, 5 times I've received 39 stripes. This was a punishment administered by the Jews. The law said you could punish certain crimes with 40 stripes, and the legalistic Jews wanted to make sure they didn't exceed the limit, and so they would stop at 39. It was usually with a leather strap embedded with various sharp objects. 5 times, 39 stripes. Beaten with rods 3 times. This would be Roman punishment. No limit on the number of times. Stoned in the city of Lystra. Shipwrecked 3 times. Danger day and night in the sea. Danger in rivers, bandits, countrymen, Gentiles. Dangers in cities, dangers in the country, false brethren, gone without sleep, been hungry, been thirsty, been cold, been naked, and always the burden of the churches. Well, you put all this effort into that, and you just hope and pray that these people remain faithful. You don't want your work to be for nothing. Now you might think Paul might be a little bitter. God, you picked me out here, you gave me this mission, and here's what I get. I don't know how Paul does this. Why he keeps doing this. Says a lot about Paul's faith. But who is this man Timothy? That's the writer of the letter. We first encounter Timothy on Paul's first missionary journey. He visits a city called Lystra. He and Barnabas, and evidently have some success. In fact, maybe one of his first converts there was Timothy. And by the way, Paul is stoned in Lystra. Some of the locals were kind of upset with what he was doing. But they go back, they report, and then they say, well, let's go follow up on these churches and see how they're doing. Well, they come back to Lystra, and that's where we encounter Timothy for the first time. This is Acts chapter 16. And he's described as a disciple. And we're also told about his family. His mother is a believer. His father's a Greek, a pagan. the people of Lystra, he impressed Paul to the point that Paul said, why don't you come go with me, be part of my mission team? And he does. And so for the next 10, 15 years, he and Paul are traveling companions on these missionary journeys. So he is frequently mentioned in Paul's writings. In fact, Paul, when he writes, will mention that Timothy is with him in the Philippian letter, both letters to the Thessalonians, 2 Corinthians, Colossians. So he and Timothy become almost inseparable during the next several years. He also uses him as a troubleshooter. He sent him, we read in Philippians chapter 2, where Paul says, I'm going to send Timothy to you. I have no man like him. He genuinely cares for your soul, for your interest. Everyone looks after their own interest, but not Timothy. The early part of Philippians chapter 2 talks about the mind of Christ. And one of those characteristics of the mind of Christ is his self-emptying mind. And Paul is saying Timothy has that same mind. He has emptied himself. But Timothy's got some issues. He's relatively young. Don't know how old he is. Speculation, early to mid-30s, maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. What does that say? Well, you might think about back to the beginnings of your own career. I look back at mine, and man, I think how little I knew. I didn't know what I didn't know, and Timothy's probably the same way. He's learning. He's a beginner. He's a novice, even though he's traveling with Paul. And so you got to think about his relatively young age as he begins. And Paul's going to give him some big jobs to do. He is sometimes referred to as timid Timothy. We might describe him today as an introvert. He seems to be relatively shy. He seems to shrink from difficult tasks. Paul, in writing to the Corinthians, he said, when Timothy comes to you, you be sure and put him at ease. He's going to be kind of uptight. So make him comfortable. But he also mentions about Timothy's young age. He says, let no man despise your youth. You're young, and you're going to have some credibility issues because of that, but you go ahead and you do what you need to do. And he warned him about his youthful lust. Avoid youthful lust. Temptations that might be specifically of concern to a younger person. So, timid Timothy, God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but a spirit of power and love and self-discipline. So, Timothy, you're going to need to man up with the jobs I'm going to give you. But Timothy's also got some health issues. In 1 Timothy, Paul said, you need to drink a little wine in addition to your water for your stomach maladies and some other problems you got. So we got a man here who is young, physically weak, and shy. And Paul's going to hand over the torch to him. Kind of a scary thought, but God's going to use him in a powerful way. So, what we've got here is a very personal letter as we get into it next week. from a veteran preacher to a young preacher, to one who's been around the block a whole lot of times to another who's just starting out. And so you might say, well, there's not going to be much here for me because I'm neither one of those. I'm neither young nor a preacher. Well, looking around the audience here, some of you are not very young. You're like me. Your hair's either turned gray or turned loose. But folks, we're all preachers. All of us are. Every day, we're all preachers. So you can't cop out on that one. Paul says, you yourselves are our letter written on our hearts, known and read by everybody. You show that you're a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, not written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of the human heart. So what Paul's saying is, you are a walking epistle that people read. And it may be the only epistle that they read. So be careful. Be attentive to how you walk. Jesus said it this way: let your light shine in such a way before men that they will see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. See your good works. You're preaching every day with the way you conduct yourself and behave yourself. The late President George Bush said it this way: preach the gospel, use words if necessary. I think several other people have used that quote. There's one other quote I didn't put in here that says you don't have to have a pulpit to preach. That's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, a philosopher of the mid-19th century. So although we don't preach from this pulpit, we preach in our daily lives every day. And obviously, in spite of President Bush's words here, ultimately we got to use words. But the manner of life that we live, the way we live our lives, may open a door or it may close a door for the opportunity to tell the story, to tell the gospel, the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus. So Timothy, you and we have to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. So Timothy, you got a daunting challenge before you as Paul moves on, and it's going to be your turn next. And in spite of your physical ailments, in spite of your personality, in spite of your youthful age, you got some big responsibilities ahead of you. Okay, your time to talk. Yo, John.
I was just wondering if we could, if you could help me out with the timeline a bit here. Just trying to fit this in with, say, how long after the book of Acts ends. So in Acts, he's in Rome. Now, I think I've heard there's some tradition that maybe he leaves Rome for a while, maybe even gets to Spain on a fourth missionary journey, and then there's a second imprisonment. Can you help me understand that timeline?
There is two Roman imprisonments, and this is the second one. He expresses in Romans 15 that he wants to go to Spain. Whether he ever got there or not, I'm not sure. He wanted to take the gospel west to Spain. He was in prison in Philippi. He was in prison in Caesarea. You know, he appears before Festus and Agrippa. Who's the other one? Anyway, but there are two Roman imprisonments, and this is the second one. The dates vary, 67, 68, somewhere in there, about that time. Anybody else? I'm sorry?
Where do we generally?
I don't. Anybody? Last date of Acts, when does Acts end? I would. That's a good guess. I would guess in the mid 60s, John, but that's just a guess. I don't know. Anything else? Yeah.
Just real quick, Tommy. The characterization of him as timid, I hadn't really come across that before, so that interested me. And I'm wondering is there anything indicating that aside from the general social norms of being young and not talking against an older man? And I know he did counsel him not to rebuke an older man harshly, so it does seem like he's got the fire in him, maybe.
Right. I don't know. There's several of the works that I consulted attributed to him to being rather introverted and reserved in his personality. But yes, sir.
I was going to say that, you think about young Timothy, but also thinking about Paul. Paul had to be his hero, by all means. A lot of people start the race, but they don't finish. But Paul has started the race, he's lived the race, and he's going to finish the race. And now he's ready to pass this on to Timothy. And what a great inspiration Paul had to be to him as he faced maybe some tasks that were very difficult for him. But he saw an old soldier that he's done the course.
Right. Great point. Anybody else? We're about out of time here. We're gonna begin next week with chapter 1, and I expect you to have it memorized. I won't do like Larry does and give you a pop test. I'll give you a real test. Okay. Thank you for your attention tonight, and next week, 1 Timothy chapter 1.